all children are dependent on their parents for survival. Now, this is kind of like, sort of a trite point. People say it a lot, but, it's important, I think, to remember when we talk about pedagogy or, any kind of sort of like, when we talk about like developmental psychology in general, like this is the basis of it ultimately. And I think that there's really no point in talking about psychology in general unless this is sort of like, understood to be, the primary thing, right? This whole thing of like incomplete separation or, whatever you want to call it, like this is not understood, I think, basically leads to most of the main misunderstandings when it comes to psychology. But in practice, the mother has all of the power over the child, regardless of if it's a boy or a girl. And it's a point that's worth making, so that we can kind of clear out these delusional ideas about the paternal role and, the Electra complex. Like, I'm not saying that it never happens, I suppose, but it's like, just by comparison, like, it's so minor of an issue, like, fathers almost have, they're just like an irrelevance for a secondary thought, and they always have been. And it's worse now for sure in that respect. Like, it's, fathers are definitely more of a secondary consideration than, at any point in the past. But that is ultimately how it has been throughout history. Mothers have had the primary control over children. If the child is either never allowed to pursue their independence from their mother or is unable to take meaningful action in pursuing their independence due to neglect, the child will develop a continued psychological dependency into adulthood. And yes, I think that this is kind of like observable. Children will at a certain point sort of naturally be inclined to pursue their own independence, like to become their own people. But this is something that can really only be done, and be meaningful in any sense of the word, like, on the child's terms. It cannot be done by, like, it can't be forced onto them. And, a lot of the time, parents will try to force their children to become independent, and then, they'll respond by feeling denied of, they will feel like they were denied something. They'll feel abandoned or, neglected, whatever. And so they don't really develop independence. There's still this kind of attachment there, even if it is like in the negative, when we talk about like rebellion or that sort of thing, right? Like, that's still attachment. It's just kind of like, manifesting in like in the reverse, like in a sort of inverted sense, because the child is trying to claim independence, but they feel they can't, and so they have to take symbolic action against their parents, that sort of thing. So ultimately, if the parents' behavior towards the child, especially the mothers, is either neglectful or overbearing in some capacity, the child will not be able to pursue their own independence, and they will not psychologically break from the parent, and they will always be in this kind of matrix of trying to win, in this womb of trying to win status, and approval from, their parents, but other people or other things as surrogates for their parents. This dependence necessarily results in feelings of abandonment and inadequacy in the child as it develops, and is forced by circumstance to separate from the parents without being allowed to make that decision on their own terms. And yes, this is basically what happens. The child feels that they have to win their parents' affection, and that makes them feel inadequate. They feel that there is something fundamentally wrong with them, something that has to be changed in order to win the approval of other people, of their parents. And that kind of fundamental feeling of inadequacy and brokenness, that is what the Oedipal complex is, I think. That's basically what that is conceptually. And it's also, I think, the basis for pretty much everything in our society. It's not something that's limited to, just personal relationships or, psychology or whatever. It's not just that. It's, it's a lot more than that. It really does encompass basically the foundation for our social order and our culture more broadly. Like, it's the cornerstone of it. It's the thing which sort of like makes all of the rest possible. It's the thing which forces people to take action as a part of a collective. In both boys and girls, this dependence is most likely to be directed towards the mother due to the mother having the most intimate access to the child, especially from an early age. This dependence is almost universal, not because it is essential to childhood development, but because the mother compulsively inflicts it onto her children as a manifestation of her own experience in childhood, using children as a surrogate for their own sentiments of abandonment for her own sentiments of abandonment towards her parents. That's just, what I'm describing there is just sort of like, compulsive repetition. And it's true. I think people have children mostly either out of conformism, which is, essentially trying to approval seek, win validation from other people, as a surrogate for your parents, or they have children because they want a child to love them, because they want someone to sort of like adore them. And, in both of those cases, it's just this need for, it's this very infantile need. It's very, very infantile. And it's like, it's sort of, it is something that comes from people's own childhoods. So when they have children, they just end up essentially repeating the exact same insecurities, that were forced onto them in childhood. They force it onto their children. They see their children doing something that they would punish themselves for as a child, and they feel, angry about it. They feel they need to like adjust their child's behavior. They feel they need to fix it in some way, reorient them, reform them, and so they end up just kind of repeating the same thing. Because of this commonality between the sexes, the expression of this unresolved dependency manifests quite differently in a romantic context. Whatever, I get to it. Men see women as a surrogate mother and an escape to their own inner feelings of abandonment. So men are capable of seeing their romantic partner as being a surrogate mother. Women are not. That's kind of what the point I'm trying to illustrate here. To them, sex becomes the ultimate validation and approval. It shows the ersatz mother appreciation of him and comes to symbolically represent his reunification with his mother. That's what sex is. That's why kind of like the male conceptual horizon sort of like, always comes to sex. It always ends there. Men do everything because they want sex, pretty much. And I know that that's like, people would suggest that that means that the male psyche is uncomplicated or simple, but it's not. It is actually like extremely nuanced, the way that this can manifest in an individual. It can be so broad, as to encompass basically like the entirety of philosophy. In the sense that this can all, like they can be looking for ways of reforming themselves, which I think ultimately come down to just like making themselves more palatable to women, to having sex, make themselves more palatable to women so they can have sex. It's not, I suppose there are probably other masculine drives, like there are other things which occupy the male psyche, but I feel like all of them sort of like come back to that, or seem sort of downstream from that in some way. And I think that it's not wrong when women accuse men of having like a single track mind. I think that that's true. It's just very difficult to see what that actually looks like moment to moment, while your thoughts are passing by, because you're looking at this kind of like enormous thing, the male psyche. It's like something enormous, with so many sort of minute details which you can look at and say like, oh well, surely this is, but it, surely this is not just like a manifestation of like a desire to reunify with the mother through sex or whatever. But I mean, you can always trace it back to that, and I think that that's like kind of the fundamental point that Freud is making. Finding this sensation of validation and reunification fleeting, as orgasm passes very quickly, the man is left with the same desires, but again is unsatisfied. Once the immediate disappointment of failing to have attained his mother's love through sex, Once the immediate disappointment of failing to attain his mother's love through sex passes, he busies himself again with repeating the process. The sex drive being basically a biological drive which has been hijacked by childhood experience through mechanisms outside of the scope of this video. Attaining sex and the validation of woman is his reason to live, because women represent his mother, and his ultimate aim is to appease his mother, or the role she engendered in his mind. Yes, so, I mean, again, this is such a fucking trite point, and it's something people say about Freud, like, oh, he's not really talking about the mother. I mean, it comes from the mother, though. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, it comes from the mother. It comes from, you could talk about, like, oh, she serves a maternal role. She's just, like, it's a symbolic mother. It's like, no, I mean, it comes from the mother, and yes, it becomes symbolic as he, grows up and has to find justifications for himself and his behavior, and sort of, like, trying to navigate this incest taboo, but ultimately that's where it begins, right? And the Oedipal complex is not sexual in its origin, which is, I think, the thing that's like most sort of confusing to people, and why they reject it, like, outright, because they don't understand that, it's not really sexual in its origin. The sex drive is just hijacked, because I don't believe in polymorphous perversity. That seems kind of absurd to me, like the idea that there's like infantile sexuality. It's just ridiculous. That's sort of like stretching the definition of sexuality and just making it completely useless as a concept. So I would say just throw away all of that. And also, frankly, there is no, there is nothing resembling like sexual desire in an infant, or like someone who is like prepubescent. Nothing that is like comparable or like analogous to what an adult experiences, or someone who is like post-pubescent experiences, when we talk about like sexual desire. Like it's just not like that. I don't know if that's how it is. I don't know how it is for girls, but that's just my experience. Like I never wanted to fuck, prior to being 12. The thought kind of struck me as like bewildering more than anything, and I don't think that that's like just repression either. It's just something that you really do not understand prior to the age of 12 or whenever you go through puberty. Not trying to make a moral point about anything. It's just like that's just like the reality. I don't believe in like pre-adolescent sexuality. That's just like absurd. I don't really see that. For women, the romantic mechanism is of a different nature, as she also is dependent on her mother's approval. Yeah, exactly. It's like that's the point, right? It's not just like it's not just men who are dependent on women's approval. It's also women. Women do not care about men. They don't care. Men are irrelevant to them. That's not. Men are. Well, yeah, whatever. We'll get to that. For women, their mothers come to represent not a romantic prospect that they can reunify with, but rather the arbiter of social approval and acceptability. Mothers are the basis for all of their introjects, commanding them and encouraging them to pursue certain aims to win her approval. For women, their mothers are the architects of their self-image, their aspirations, and who they think they should be. It is a woman's ultimate goal to become the person their mother wishes they were. It is, yeah. That's what the ultimate goal is for a woman. It's to please her mother. And that makes it sound like a woman could never... I guess like we could probably... I think I talk about it later, so I won't talk about that right now. But for women, I think, what they want is to be... they want to attain this kind of like ideal image of themselves. Everything is about fantasy and image and, pretense and this sort of thing for women. I mean, that's why they wear makeup. That's why they, are so concerned about fashion or their appearance. That's the reason. It's because everything is about image for women, because attaining a certain image is their ultimate goal in life. And that is something that is put into them by their mother. And yes, mothers do this both consciously and unconsciously. This is not something that is like necessarily made explicit always, but it can be, definitely. I mean, I think about like mother-daughter relationships that I've seen in my life, and yeah, I mean, it's very much the mother will instruct the daughter to, wear this, wear that, don't wear that, whatever. It gets like that. And that's like the kind of more extreme or obvious examples, but I do think that ultimately a lot of this is implicit and probably hard to point out from the outside. And yeah, sorry, I'll just keep going. As such, women's intentions in romance are very different from men's, because the aim for women is to receive validation from their mother, who could never be substituted for a man, as men do not have the female complex, which is motivated by the mother's insecurities, and which the women are desperately trying to satisfy. So what mothers do to their daughters is... because women are, like all people, like all adults, extremely, like, abusive to themselves, very coercive and punishing towards, like, themselves and their head. They see their daughters essentially making the same mistakes as them. It pisses them off. They don't like it. They get very angry. And so they try to, like, coerce their child's behavior. And, instill kind of anxiety and insecurity inside of them so that they will self-regulate. And they don't notice they're doing it. They don't really know why they're doing it. It's just something that kind of comes out of them compulsively, without thinking. And it's because, mothers are repeating what happened to them, in their own, like, dysfunctional mother-daughter relationship that they experienced when they were young, and so on, forever, Instead, woman's aim in romance is to use the man as a tool to help her attain her image of who she ought to be. Men represent a fashion accessory to her, but one which they can become dependent on, unable to see themselves how they would like to without him. Yeah, sorry. I think I wrote that in kind of an unclear way. But yes, because self-image is important to women, like, your image of yourself can become, like, dependent on a particular person or thing or whatever, and you can feel, like, excruciating pain from having that stripped from you. So I don't want to suggest that it is like women are incapable of, becoming attached to men or never experience these kind of, like, extreme emotions like men do. I would say women experience them less, but I think they do experience them also. And I'm not trying to justify women. Like, I think that romance is, like, a farce, frankly, So this is not, like, a good thing that women sort of develop these, like, very intense feelings, or, like, this intense need for a man. Like, that's... But ultimately, their idea of romance, or the way they experience romance, it's just of a different nature, For men, it's like they, like, what they want is to reunify with their mother. And so the woman can basically be, like, the only thing that matters in the entire world. I don't think that that's true for women. It is about image projection for women. The man will never be the only person in the entire world for her, because even if she is dependent on him, like, it's still about having him there as, like, an image, right? And I think mothers do kind of, like, instill this sort of idea of, like, who a woman should be, like, oh, you should have children, this is what, like, an adult woman is, this is what you have to be, and that's not a superficial thing, in spite of what people think. Like, so the mother says to the daughter, like, you have to get married, you have to have children, and whatever. That's not superficial, that is the woman's reason for doing anything, this kind of desire to win social approval. And ultimately, yes, they're not going to get that social approval from men, so the man can never be the only thing in their life, It has to be about showing off to a certain extent, and the approval you get from showing off, or showing off your children, or whatever. That's why women get into relationships. But, they can become very, very, like, dependent on these kind of, situations, or, like, these dynamics, like a particular man or their children or whatever. They can become very, very much attached to them. But it's ultimately because their image of themselves will, like, fall apart without it. Femininity is the fragile gender, as opposed to what everyone says. Like, masculinity is remarkably not fragile, actually. It's very, very solid, because it only requires one thing to, like, continue, sort of like this mechanism. It only has to have, sex, basically. That's it. And so it is not nearly as fragile as femininity. however, ultimately there is a difference between men and women in this respect, as women do not essentially need men. Their self-image could be attained without the help of a man. If the mother's implanted image of the woman does not require a man, this is more and if the mother's implanted image of the woman does not require a man. This is more and more commonly the case now due to the proliferation of feminist ideas and the state's willingness to cooperate with them by artificially elevating its woman's capacity to attain financial independence without the aim of men. So, yeah, I mean, femininity has this kind of, because it is about self-image, it has this kind of natural tendency towards grandiosity. And so I think feminism is really kind of appealing to something primal in women, which is, their desire for acclaim and approval, for validation, respect. So, there is this kind of grandiose aspect to femininity. And I think that, feminism really is appealing to women because it plays into that, it kind of aggrandizes them, it makes them more grandiose, it justifies their grandiosity, it requires them to do less to attain their self-image. And to them that seems liberating, but it's not really, because they're still stuck in the exact same sort of complex. Nothing has changed. They're just given there's just more fuel being added to the fire, I suppose, right? So I think that, feminism as an ideology is basically like something which will kind of it will turn femininity into something which is frankly unmanageable, and will continue to expand feminine grandiosity to the point where it really cannot be satisfied by material conditions, and then this will result in resentment, and then that will be inflicted onto the next generation, because mothers are in total control over the next generation. Fathers are an irrelevance. I mean, again, I don't know how many times I have to hear about the importance of fathers, or people talking about single mothers, or this, or it's like that fathers have never been relevant. I don't understand where this sort of contention comes from. I'm not saying that's how it should be either. It's just look at history, just look at any culture in the world. It's never ever been like that. Fathers have never been relevant. Never, not once, The broadly accepted image of what a woman should be as prescribed by society and then given from mother to daughter contains men less and less, and as such, woman's desire for men decreases. The introduction of this feminist rhetoric also means fixations such as independence, domination of men, and grandiosity more broadly become more and more common, as feminism is inherently grandiose, liberationist, and a contrarian ideology. So yes, I mean, I'm just basically saying there, feminism is grandiose. Femininity has this natural propensity towards grandiosity because it is about acclaim, first and foremost. For men, there is obviously a grandiose streak there too, but it's really minor in comparison, and I think far less common, And typically, grandiosity in men is a byproduct of abnormal conditions. I'll say that it's not the default like it is with women. In this scenario, women will desire more and more servile, mediocre men, as the only possible utility for men to them is as accessories to their grandiose self-image as instilled by their mothers. So yeah, like, women do not need men financially anymore. They're just like an irrelevance in that sense, and so like the image of what a woman should be or has to be is like, it no longer really has to contain men. And so the only interest that women really have in men is just that, you know, they like the feeling of power they get over them. They like using them as a fashion accessory. And, you know, as a fashion accessory, like, the more power you have over the man, the better. It also satisfies their grandiosity too, you know. I don't, yeah. So I don't think it's like, I don't think it's like how a lot of people talk about with, oh, you know, women are only attracted to 10 out of 10 guys who are like super, you know, traditionally good looking. They have these rugged features, strong jawline, and whatever. No, I really do not think that. Women prefer servile, docile looking guys because that's what they know they can control, you know. That's what they want at the end of the day. They do not care about looks. They do not care about men's looks. A woman would never give a man power in that sense, in that capacity. So I think that is woman's preference. You know, their preference is, yeah, civility, definitely. It's not independence, it's not ruggedness, it's not strength or being a provider or whatever. It's absolutely none of those things. In fact, I think women might be offended by guys who are like that and put off by them. They might view them as being a threat, you know, because women view themselves as being in competition with their, you know, romantic partners, their boyfriends, whatever. They do not want them to outshine them. They want the attention to be given to them, not their partner, right? Like, that's not the way their mind works, because their sole aim in life is to get attention, is to get validation, is to get approval. In turn, men, still utterly dependent on women, find themselves chosen less and less, gradually becoming superfluous and unable to attain their one goal in life. They develop greater and greater feelings of insecurity. These same sensations being the origin of their drive for sexual reunification, their fantasies will attempt to satisfy these increasingly extreme feelings of disillusionment with greater and greater extremity and pathos, leading to more intense sexual dysfunction in turn, causing the few relationships which do occur to sour, for common sentiments against men to proliferate, causing the few relationships which do occur to sour, and for common sentiments against men to proliferate amongst women. So, yeah, I think that sexual dysfunction with men will continue to become more and more common, not in the sense that sex crimes will increase or anything, but, you know, the sexual interests of men will become more and more sort of deviant, because I think that sexual deviancy is a byproduct of deprivation and insecurity. Any sort of sexual interest you have ultimately is about trying to satisfy some feeling of insecurity that you have. You know, because, I mean, that's what the sex drive is sort of repurposed for. If you're an adult, that's what happens, you know, through the Oedipal complex. It's there to satisfy that incompleteness inside of you. It is there to make you feel adequate, to make you feel whole as a person, you know, to reunify with your mother, whatever. In most cases where relationships do occur and are successful, it is because the man is sufficiently servile to appease the woman's grandiosity and in turn increases her grandiosity, meaning that both parents are even more likely to inflict the same treatment onto their own children with no meaningful escape really being found anywhere in the family for these children. yeah, so like this just means that all of these problems will continue to get worse in the next generation because, yes, women are still in complete control over children more than they ever have been. They're more grandiose than ever. And because they're more grandiose than ever, they're more likely to become irritated by their children's behavior and want to remedy it. And so they inflict greater and greater harm onto their children psychologically and instill them with deeper and deeper neuroses. And then you also have the kind of changing social sphere, which creates the image for what women want to attain, who they want to become. That also continues to sort of like get worse in the sense of, the anti-male rhetoric increases and the sort of like ideal for what women should want continues to become, more and more grandiose. It's like, I think what you can expect to happen is just that these issues of like maternal wounding that happen very young will only increase throughout these next generations. And I think that there's more to be said about that too with regards to the internet. I don't view the internet as being this like horrible deleterious thing. It's just like, I don't know, it will have relevance to the social environment though, and I think that that's worth pointing out, so I might talk about that later. And then I said, as such, these problems can only become more and more acute as greater and greater division grows between the sexes. And I think really the point here that I want to make is, the thing that I want to articulate is that this is not an essential problem of humanity. It is not true that women or men are dependent by nature on their mothers. This is a byproduct of their parents' behavior specifically. It is always unique. It is always ultimately relevant to the individual and their experiences with their family. The Oedipus complex is not a byproduct of our nature. It is not a necessary thing that all children must go through. It is an unnatural imposition, and yes, it is one which has many benefits for humanity, in the sense of like civilization clearly is a byproduct of this. This need to take action for collective good or for the sake of the family or for whatever principle you can think of is like ultimately taking something and placing it into the role of the mother for the child. It is using this kind of fundamental brokenness, insecurity, and dysfunction inside of human beings, which is a byproduct of their, the way they were raised and the way their parents were raised, and instrumentalizing it and kind of like offering solutions which aren't really solutions, to get people to fall in line and work towards like some sort of like higher common good or whatever it might be. I don't think this is essential. I really don't. And I also don't think the alternative is primitivism either. I don't think that language is an unnatural imposition in the same way that, the Oedipal complex is. I really don't think there's anything comparable to the Oedipal complex. It's something unique and kind of alien in psychology. It is, there's really nothing that is like, there's really nothing that is comparable to it, the kind of night and day difference that it creates in an individual. Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling here. I think I should probably end it.